Hey everyone, I am Jordan Garcia, and this is the Twitter's Hidden Gems podcast, the show where we interview, highlight, and get to know small creators on Twitter. The goal is simple. We'd like these largely undiscovered people who are incredible at what they do to move from hidden gems to discovered gems. We'll hear about their backstories, their failures, successes, and journey to make their side projects their main source of income. And who knows, we may look back a year from now only to realize that we got to interview the now widely successful content creator when they were just starting. Let's get into the interview. Hey, LaSean, thank you for joining the Twitter's Hidden Gems podcast. It's great to have you. Can you tell us where you're joining from and tell us about yourself?
Pleasure to connect, Jordan. My name is LaSean Smith. I am here in the Seattle area. I've lived 11 places, so I've lived quite a few places. I count all those. As long as I've lived there for at least 6 months, it counts. And so I've actually lived a few other places for shorter periods of time. And so I've interacted with people and met people from all over. That's a pretty exciting part of my journey. And my background is super random, as I like to say. I started as a dev, moved into UX design, went to business school, and then moved into product management and strategy, started managing multidisciplinary teams. And across, that journey, what I like to say is I've just been tasting the buffet. And so I'm really energized when I get to tackle something new. And over the last few years, I've spent my time working in big tech, managing engineers and product managers. And what I currently do is I left that world at the end of last year to start investing full time. And I'm just super excited about I call your people. We can maybe touch on what and how I define that, but I really wanted to choose my customer the same way, I recommend to folks that I coach, you should choose and hire your manager. Like, don't hire the company logo. Like, if you don't deeply understand and know, how this manager is going to kind of show up, interact with you, you should keep digging on the interview process, because your best experiences are typically going to be had by hiring great folks. Similarly, I think when you start a business, you should hire your customer, and you should go into this really being thoughtful on who is a customer that I would want to serve even if they didn't pay me. And running a business is challenging, and so to get through the Seth Golden dip framework, as you've probably heard before, you got to have something that pushes you. And so if you just say, hey, what's hot right now? Well, somebody might say, oh, drop shipping is hot. Oh, no, that's not hot anymore. Oh, crypto's hot. Oh, no. Now it's NFTs. Oh, now it's, going to start a DAO. Now we're going to, do generative AI. Like, if you're just chasing the shiny thing, because you think you can make some money, you probably won't be able to compete against the person who genuinely cares about that audience. And so all of those are fine places to focus if you care about the humans who are in those communities. And so I really get energized by my current role because I've started with kind of hiring my customer, and my customer is really small businesses. That's where I get most energized because there's so much opportunity for them to kind of reach beyond what they may perceive as their potential. And so I'm just really excited about any conversations I have, one-to-one, one-to-many, that help me get smarter about who these folks are, what they care about, and how I can help.
I love that, man. You have a very extensive background. You've touched a lot of things. You called it the buffet line. Tell us about who you are that made you pursue such a varying career path. What was in your background? What makes up the way you think, your personality, that led you to so many different things? If you can identify one trait in specific or in particular.
Well, first, we'll start with the environment. Both of my parents obviously are huge points of impact there. My dad was a musician. My mom was a teacher and then librarian. And so imagine someone who's a teacher and spending their time, in a library. Like, you see all these books behind me. The idea that there's just all this information in a book And, it's funny, a lot of, probably about half of the books, or maybe not quite half, 35, 40% of my books are very visual. So they're just a lot of pictures. So it's like, I mean, like I read all the time, so I'm not going to pretend that. However, I love a great book because it is many times, 10, 15, 20 years of someone's journey and education, like all compacted into like 8 hours. And if you went to that person in many cases, you said, "Hey, I want to hire you for 8 hours of coaching, right? I want to soak it up." I don't know what they're going to charge you, $500,000 an hour. Like it's going to be, 8, 10 grand of an investment to go get that. And you go buy that book for 15 bucks. Right. And so my environment, kind of created by my mom's curiosity and, kind of passion for education. And then my dad's creativity kind of teed up these areas that I think I found most interesting. And so along the way, I've had this kind of duality that took me a while to come to terms with, where, I would say, well, no, I'm this creative and I'm doing these things. And then I'd be like, no, I'm a software developer and I'm doing these things. And the world wasn't showing me the clean label. And so I didn't really know, where I would fit. And I think the saving grace is I had enough confidence to say, well, it's okay if I don't fit. Right. And so I just kept exploring. And where I kind of landed once I kind of kicked off my career, I finished high school early. I went into the military. When I got out of the military, I just started doing all sorts of agency work, and I worked at some startups. And I knew, like, I'd been coding as a kid, but I wasn't, I didn't have the right methodology. I didn't know how to code with teams. Like, there's a bunch of things I had to learn basically from scratch. That was also a very humbling experience, right? So, someone like myself who I consider myself fairly technical because I have been programming for a long time. That didn't mean I knew how to do that for work. Right. And so I had to kind of relearn, like, just because I knew the syntax and I could bang out something on my own, it didn't mean I could go show up with a team and be productive together. And so that's a whole set of skills I had to go learn through that process. But back to your question, I think through those experiences, the biggest thing that's been unlocked for me is like knowing myself. Right. And so I have a handful of things that have been useful. I have extreme focus, right? Like I can sit in front of a computer, and if it's not like meetings and it's just kind of like me, conversations like this, or I'm writing something, doing kind of focused work, I can do 10, 12-hour days consistently, 6 days a week, and be super energized at the end of it. As soon as you make me do administrative work, or you get me into a lot of meetings, I don't know what it is, like 8 hours, I'm like so burnt. Right. And so one of the things I find, this is kind of quick sidebar, is I'm not interested in like not working. I'm just interested in not doing those things because I know they're not energy givers, right? And so part of the beauty of being a full-time investor is, one, I get to make my schedule, but I get to meet all these interesting people. But as soon as I feel like it's not giving me energy, I just turn the dial down, and then I can just go, read research papers, read, all sorts of financial reports, other things where it's just like it's energizing for me. And so my extreme focus has been a boon. I'm a systems thinker, so I like to think in frameworks and systems. I think we all can benefit with that. Some people love to be free flowing, and I've tried to find ways to be more unstructured. But I think the more you can embrace systems based work, the more productivity density you're going to get. Then three, pretty clear on time management. So I have a system I've been using for years where I book everything in 15-minute increments, and then I do a technique called calendar journaling. I go back afterwards, and if I cheated, like maybe I procrastinated, and I said, oh, you know what I was going to do? I was going to go write this concept memo for this pitch that I have, or for this this founder that I'm going to go meet with. And then no, I actually just watched some YouTube. And usually I'm watching like some productivity focused thing, but I can't really count it as being productive, right? I'm procrastinating. And so I use this calendar journaling as a way to kind of keep me honest. And as a result, I'm pretty good at time management, even though, I'm always cheating. Like, this framework keeps me honest. And so without that, I think I would just kind of squander more of my minutes each day. But, those are all tactics and techniques. I would say, back to your core question, I I'm willing to blow up my personal identity almost at any point. And the reason I believe that's so powerful is when we build relationships with people and they're like, oh, I remember Jordan. I worked with him at such and such, and he was great. We used to go to lunch, and like we have this construct of our coworkers, our managers, people who, we interact, our customers, all sorts of relationships. And on the other side of that, it can create anxiety. It can create all sorts of weird kind of negative emotions when you go tell somebody like, oh, I'm not that anymore. I'm this other thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that part of my super kind of strength, and this is why I have such a random career, is I can get pretty far down a path and I don't look at that sunk cost as something I need to preserve. It's just like, well, now you've made it to this level as a software engineer. Like you're going to go switch and take a demotion as a UX designer. Yes. Oh, now you know how to build this stuff. You're going to go back to school and like learn how to be a product manager. Yes. Oh, now like all of these points, I'm just willing to like blow it all up. And the culmination of that is what's made my talent stack more valuable. But I don't get there if I wasn't willing to kind of have these multiple places where I was willing to give up what maybe someone else perceived as valuable.
Yeah, that's powerful, man. A lot of people tie their identity to what they're doing. Most people do not wear as many hats as you have in their life because they allow that sunk cost to keep them trapped at what they're currently doing. So I have a two-part question for you. Number one, out of all the hats you've worn, which did you enjoy the most? And then my second question, if you can log it all as well in your head, is how did you get so comfortable being willing to change your hat, your role, whatever you're doing, without feeling like a failure through transition? So number one, which of those was your favorite? Number two, how'd you get comfortable doing it and not feeling like a failure in the process?
Yeah. So I'm going to answer the second one first. When I was a little kid, I was in it was like a Bible study summer program, and we had to like remember, memorize all these things. And I was like, really, I have pretty good memory. And so, I went and memorized the things like, I'm going to be first in this, whatever this little competition was. And it was just like this chain of events that all happened where this woman, I don't know if she was a Sunday school teacher. I don't know. I don't remember what her role or title was, but, I went to present my piece and I said, whatever I had memorized. And she's like, that's incorrect. And I was like, huh. And like, my brain was like, I could have sworn I memorized that properly. And so I just kind of took it at face value, right? This adult told me I was wrong. I'm probably like 9 years old or something like at this point. And I didn't think of anything of it other than I felt bad because I was like, I put all this work in and it didn't work out. And I wanted to win, right? Like this, my brain, I was like trying to gamify everything. We could get to that later on. That's kind of why I do this calendar journaling thing. I've done food journaling. I did a quick sidebar. I did food journaling one time. I've done it many times. The longest streak is 2.5 years, where everything I put in my body that was not unsweet tea or water, I logged for 2.5 years. And so I just love the game of all of this. Like no one, I didn't publish this anywhere. It's not like, hey, look at this thing. And I needed the social pressure. I just love to log this stuff. But anyway, I went back home and I looked at what I was studying. I was like, and I was right. Right. And I was like, my little 9-year-old brain was right now. Like, I'm sure like she had no malintent, like, whatever. But so the next day I go back and I'm trying to like show her, it's like, hey, like I didn't get to go in the finals because you said my thing was wrong. And like, so what are you going to do about it? Right. And like, I'm just kind of like, I don't know what a little 9-year-old with like a piece of paper, in my hand, looking all raggedy probably. But she was nice and she was kind. So she wasn't like dismissive of me, but it was just like, it was almost like flippant. She was polite, but dismissive in a, like, you're just a kid. And it's just like, oh, okay, next time we'll get it right. And it's crazy how in life, like these small, tiny little moments, like leave this imprint. And I remember walking away from that. And I told myself this, I said, these adults don't know what they're talking about. And I mean, to this day, I'm an adult, obviously, or I try to be. And I still, have this thing that so many of us don't know what we're talking about, even if we have a credential. Like just because somebody has a PhD in blah, 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 it doesn't mean they're right. Now, they're likely to be more right than an uneducated person who doesn't have
Sure.
that data, doesn't have that background. But this assumption that points of authority or points of familiarity are going to be just correct is something that I just didn't believe. And so when someone would tell me I was great or that I sucked, I just didn't put much weight to it. And so
Mm.
back to your core question, that woman, kind of like giving me that negative experience, I just decided to turn it to something else, and it's really been fuel for many years on how I tackle things. And so as a result, um, when I've gotten to these situations where someone has told me something I didn't believe, I just say, adults don't know what they're talking about. So that's the first question. The second, of all the things I've done, I think the thing that's been the most enjoyable is my work where I'm doing something as a solopreneur, and it's, I think, the opposite of a lot of people. And this is another thing I've really tried to be honest with myself. There are things that I can do that I would feel like I would argue I'm quite good at, but I just don't enjoy doing. Right.
Yeah.
So, I've spent a good chunk of my career in the software industry, but also I've done a fair amount in entertainment and media. I've produced multiple feature films, and while I love the gear and the process of the making movies, I just do not like it. And it's one of these things I told myself, like, oh my goodness, it's going to be so amazing, right? And multiple of these projects have landed on popular streamers and other types of things. So from an industry standpoint, I've been successful, but I genuinely do not like event based work where we're all going to show up at this location. We all have to eat, wash our hands, do all these human things, and try to create something on demand.
Hmm.
My brain just doesn't like to work like that. And so while I really, feel privileged to have had those experiences, they're just not for me. I tried real estate investing. I was pretty good at the numbers, but it was just like paint dry boring. I was just like, this is the unlock for financial independence for many people. It's not for me. Like, I just don't like this. And so what I love about solopreneurship, with the asterisk of, you know, building solo with social support, I think the second half is like, I don't believe people should just like go get a laptop and just go hide in a corner and try to make something. Like, that's a silly
Right.
way to run almost any business. But if you figure out who your humans are, like who are your people, who you're trying to serve, you've kind of figured out a way to build some relationships with them, and then you're solving some problem. That, to me, when I have as many automation tools and other things at hand, is just like so energizing, because it's like a constant puzzle. And the whole thing is like, how do I solve this puzzle? And so the dopamine hit that I get is so high. And I'm never kind of getting, the energy draining kind of meetings or other types of things. That's at the core of why I love that so much. But again, with the asterisk, it has to come with, for me at least, a social support structure where I have peers, I have mentors, I have sponsors, I have other folks to help guide me. But it's not in context of doing my work or building the thing. It's in making sure that I'm connected to humans in a healthy way and have the right motivation and support structure.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot there. I love the story that you mentioned from your childhood with being in Sunday school, having to probably recite a memory verse, and it didn't go the direction you had hoped for, at least not officially with her,
Yeah.
even though you were correct. And so I'm curious, you've with all the areas you've touched in your life, you mentioned the support community that you need. How different is that support community for you when you've gone from role to role? Because I would imagine the support community when you're an author or a product manager would differ from the support community you'd have from the military or private equity, that crowd. So do you have a consistent baseline of people that are in your life no matter what role you're in, or does your community change from time to time depending on what you're doing?
Yeah. So first, I always like to acknowledge points of privilege in these scenarios. I had, two great parents kind of guiding me to think about, what I could become and all those types of things. And I try not to underestimate the value of, how that confidence helps you with decision making. And so
Hmm.
someone who has maybe a different, journey along the way, they may be juggling a different set of constraints, or they might be approaching things differently. So I try not to say like there's this universal path and my way will work for you. Like we're just all, we're all so similar, but our environmental path is so different that, we just have to be honest with kind of where we have been, where we are today, and where we want to go. And
Yeah.
when we have conversations with each other that way, I just think they're more productive, and we can be more empathetic on kind of how we can help each other. But to your core question, I have this framework that I did not invent, but I've kind of simplified it and matured it over the years, and it's called the Personal Board of Directors. This is, there are consultants that go and teach these. There's a few books on this topic. Again, I have a very simplified version of it because I like simple frameworks that are easy to remember or at least put into practice. And so I got a couple of the points here. So there's 4 roles. There's the advocate. This person is your connector. They open doors. They're sometimes an influencer, a sponsor. There are the developers. These are advisors, coaches, mentors, teachers, right? There are the innovators. These are people who are like, let's go change the world. They're disruptors. They help you dream big. They want to think outside of the box, right? These are folks like maybe you go grab drinks with or you have lunch with, and it's just like, I'm telling you, this thing is broken. We could change it. Like, and you're all kind of brainstorming together. And then there are your supporters. And these are folks who are really just your cheerleaders. They're creating energy. Many times these are your family, your friends, some of your peers. And so to your question, the supporters don't change very often for me. They're pretty consistent. But the other boxes, they kind of shift over time. And the way I operationalize this list is to formalize it. So, when I'm coaching to folks, so we can talk about coaching in a minute, but because I actually use coaching not as a business, I use it as a point of signal. So all my coaching is free. So I do one-on-one and group coaching, but it is all free. And so I have very limited slots that I offer, but I'm actually using it as a feedback loop to figure out like, who are my people and what products can I go acquire or build for them? I'm not using it as the actual kind of monetization engine. So that's just a technique that I found pretty valuable. Other folks, depending on what and how they want to leverage their talent stack, it's something to consider. But back to this personal board of director, the way I coach folks is like, you should have 2 to 3 named individuals for each of these. And you should have a scheduled one-on-one, 30 to 45 minutes with each of them every 90 days.
Wow.
And if you have any gaps on any of those roles across that set of instructions, like you got work to do to go make sure you have a more resilient personal board of directors. And since it is by default kind of this quarterly exercise, it's a good inflection point to say, hey, how do I recalibrate my board? The same way a public company might say, we thank, John for all of his years of service, and now, introducing Jessica, and she's going to help us such and such. The more you just upfront with the communication that these are kind of tours of duty, and they come at different seasons of your life. Most folks actually love the fact that it's not a permanent commitment, and they can help you through some part of your journey. And so I've just found this framework as really helpful on how to not think about like, you need to get out there and be networking, or just think everyone is either peer or, someone who's ahead of you. There's just different roles that I feel that folks can play. And, my mom doesn't need to know much about, coding or technology or any of these things to be my supporter. But when I'm talking to my innovators, like, the folks that I have in that bucket are very technical, and we can have a different type of conversation. And so I just find that segmentation across the personas very beneficial.
Yeah. I've taken notes because you've inspired me to get my own personal board of directors.
Let's go. Come on, Jordan.
Yes. So I'd heard the concept back in business school. I'd heard of it, and I think it just got lost in the files of my brain and all the tests that I've taken since then, and then since, let it go out the other side of my head. But yeah, I remember this concept, and it's so powerful because I have supporters in mind naturally. You mentioned your mom is one of yours. My mom is one of mine. She listens to the podcast, my family, of course, but I need some advocates, some developers, and some innovators to the team as well. I need to get some. So this is really good. Thank you for that. And I think if anyone's listening, if you don't have a personal board of directors, you should get one.
Yeah,
there's a lot of benefits.
It's dope. Pro tip, when some people think about coach, mentor, sponsor, I recommend that folks look at those in a sequence. And so a coach can obviously be paid or unpaid. My whole personal board of directors is unpaid, but I'm not, opposed. If someone says like they feel like they can accelerate this by paying people to be part of their board of directors, like all good. But if you think about how you can be a giver and not always a taker, many times you can build these boards, including your coaches, without paying. But regardless of how you assemble the humans, the reason I think it's important to sequence these, a coach is typically going to come in and say, all right, you have something that you want to optimize for. You want to figure out your talent stack. You want to find your niche. You want to learn how to monetize. You want to, master organic marketing. You want to, be a course, right? Like whatever your thing is, they can come with a framework and a set of skills that say like, all right, here's how we go help you chase this goal. And their framework isn't, typically hyper customized to you. They found a model that's going to work, and they're going to put you through their process. Once you have great coaches, then you kind of graduate to mentors. Mentors are the situational kind of stage where it's like, okay, you now kind of know where you're going, but now you got a problem. Like, you have an employee that's giving you trouble and you're not sure the best way to handle it. You are, you just started a job and your manager sucks. You are trying to close this big, client, and you're not really sure how to, manage the sales funnel. Like whatever your thing is, the mentor, I found when they're doing it, properly, they're kind of working through kind of this scenario-based advisory capacity. And then the sponsor is typically going to use their social capital to vouch for you and open some door to take you to another place. And I think, people don't have to agree with my definitions, but the reason I break these down is when we conflate these, we kind of lose the sense of the fact that it's really hard to get a sponsor if they haven't observed your work. So who observed your work? Maybe your manager, maybe a former mentor, right? So mentors can become sponsors. I've seen that many times. I've done that where I've like someone says like, well, I'm ready to go find a new job, or I'm ready to go do this thing. And I've seen that they showed up to all the mentoring sessions on time. They did all their homework. They're asking, thoughtful questions. They're, finding the right vulnerability, and they have the right kind of, I try to, bring the right psychological safety in the conversations, but people still got to be honest with themselves. And when you see that, you're like, man, I'm willing to go introduce this to this person that I care about, that I trust. But when I get these crazy DMs on LinkedIn where folks are like, hey, we used to work at such and such. I don't remember this person, right? Maybe we never even met. This happened to a lot of folks I worked with at Deloitte. They were like, we were at Deloitte at the same time. And I was like, dude, I do not know you as a human.
Yeah.
And if they were like, hey, I have this problem, or hey, could I get 15 minutes of your time to go talk through such and such? I would probably say yes. But if they're like, hey, I saw this opening at your company, I was wondering if you could introduce me to the hiring, I was like, no way. Like, why would I do that? And so the reason I kind of walk through this flow is I do think we can be sometimes a bit more intentional in how we leverage these relationships. And you need to know when to pull the lever for some of these things. And, asking a sponsor to use their social capital when you haven't demonstrated who you are and you haven't added any value to them, like, I don't know, it just feels a little disingenuous.
Yeah. No, learning these best practices is crucial here, because I don't want to encourage someone to get a personal board of directors and then not have you, again, provide the advice of, hey, you probably don't want to go find someone and say, hey, will you sponsor me, if they've never seen your work, or if you haven't been consistent, and if you don't have excellence behind what you do. Makes perfect sense. And thank you for sharing that. I was going to ask, you've mentioned quite a few systems that you have in place for yourself. You mentioned you're a systems thinker. For your average person listening here, what are some practical day-to-day systems that you could potentially recommend to them to implement? And if that's not maybe your target audience with the systems that you've implemented, how do you help solopreneurs, other entrepreneurs, businesses implement systems themselves? So sorry for the two-parter, but wanted to ask, for your average Joe who maybe isn't an entrepreneur, any recommendations on systems they can implement? And if not that, take us the business route on that question.
Yeah. So I think on the first one, just kind of broad tips for folks to think about, and framework based thinking, is to just look at how you spend your time. And time to me is actually a better currency than money for systems based thinking. We'll switch because my other point here is going to connect to personal finance here in a moment. But when you really start thinking about how to be intentional with your time, you will unlock all sorts of inefficiencies. And the reason I like to use intentional versus productive is because when people hear productive, sometimes they're triggered to think like, oh, it's all about hustle culture and work. And like, to me, that's not the point. It's like you have 720 hours in a month, and you got to figure out how you're going to go spend them. And you should have a budget just the same way you should be budgeting your money. And so if you want to spend those hours taking naps and watching TV or playing Call of Duty, like, I'm not here to judge you. I'm just like, be intentional though, but don't say, I really want to be, a coder. I really want to be a painter. I really want to learn how to learn the guitar. And you say that, but now you're playing Call of Duty. I'm like, no, like thumbs down. Right.
Yeah.
And so folks can feel uncomfortable when you kind of call them out on, it's just like, I'm not going to tell anybody what their dream should be, but I love to ask people like, what is your destination? Like, where do you want to go and when you want to get there? How much are you willing to spend in time and money to get to that destination? And once people articulate that point, then it's like, okay, let's go unpack it. What should you stop spending time on to go get there? And there's this great story. I'll give you the short version where somebody walks into a cafe, they see somebody playing the guitar, and they say to their friend, wow, I really wish I could play the guitar like that. And it's a cafe. This isn't like state, like like a big coliseum, right? So
Right.
we can assume this isn't like Jimi Hendrix level playing, right? And so as long as you have like average dexterity in your hands, almost anybody can learn to play as good as that person. But what the
True.
person's really saying is, I wish I could do that without practicing. I wish
Hmm.
I could do that without investing time. And so I think one of the core frameworks I try to help folks kind of, like, it's almost foundational, is how to make trade-off decisions. And so you got to be able to be super honest with yourselves, and you need to be always looking at decision trees and saying, okay, I have two decisions. And the more you can like get this down to micro decisions of what you eat, how do you spend time? Am I going to keep scrolling on TikTok? Or like, again, none of these things are bad. The question is, are they in service for my destination?
Mm.
And if you don't have a destination, I think maybe that's a different set of questions that people should ask. But the more you can leverage decision trees to make high confidence decisions, I think that's the kind of the Uber framework that starts everything else off to the right place. Something a bit more tactical and more specific. I have this 6-step map that I've written out for folks, and the reason I did this is I was having conversations with people about upskilling and mindset. Then I'd have a different set of conversations on, how to think about networking, how to think about, monetizing your niche, personal finance. And then I kind of looked at it and it's like, no, just like a regular business, if you go start a new business, you should have one product and one process to start. Like anytime I look at I've judged quite a few business competitions, and I see people like, and then we're going to make money this other way, and we're going to make money this other way. And I like see all these things. It's like, you got this software piece, and then this customer success team is doing all this. I'm like, too complicated, right? And so I believe our life can benefit from having, a consolidated process. And so the 6 steps, I'll go through them quickly. The first is become valuable. And this is, knowing who you are, building your talent stack, and, finding the combination of your experiences, your skills, your values, your interests, that make you unique. If you look at something like the personal finance space, it feels like it's saturated. But as soon as you play into your talent stack, you will find that, you probably have a unique angle, right? So if I go into, YouTube and go look for, financial wellness, there's a bunch of, there's like the folks at the top of the chain who, everyone knows. But then if you just add one additional interest or one value, you unlock a whole nother community. There's a whole class of YouTubers who are doing personal finance for Muslims, others who are doing it for the Jewish community. And like, I'm not part of that community, but I found some of those videos. I'm like, these are dope. Like, they're giving me a different angle to think about it. And now that person can stand out. So that first pillar is like, figure out how you're valuable. And a lot of it has to do with just you being you. Next is build relationships. We kind of talked about this, but this is, my alternative to networking. And so it's like, all right, if you don't get out there and build relationships, you're probably not going to expose your talent stack to enough people. And so the edict there is just go meet strangers and stay uncomfortable. Third, generate income. And this is just about how do you then go monetize the combination of what makes you valuable with your relationships. 4 is stay liquid. I like this term because it's action oriented instead of personal finance. Like personal finance is like a blah thing. It means it's so conflated with so many definitions nowadays. It's like not super valuable. And the reason I like stay liquid because inherently it's talking about grow the gap. Make sure you're spending less than you make. It's challenging you. Don't chase status. Don't be buying things, for other people to think you're cool. The pickle jar theory, right? It's just like if you have an idea on something that you want to buy, write it down on your phone or on a piece of paper, and don't allow yourself to buy it for 2 weeks. And come back, and if you still want it 2 weeks later, then give yourself permission. And a lot of times, we decide like, oh, I actually didn't really want that thing, right? And there's so much, that's just stoicism, right? It's just like emotional control is like at the root of that. But staying liquid is, I think, the biggest kind of point that people break into jail, where they're doing the right things leading up to this point, right? They've done the other steps. Then they don't stay liquid because they make certain life commitments, and now they can't get to the next stage, which is buy assets. They need to buy assets that are going to generate passive income with zero extra work, right? And so anything that's semi-active, somebody's like, hey, I manage short-term rentals, or I have a couple long-term rental properties. I do a little day trading, and I'm not a fan of day trading or any of these types of things. But if you figured out a system that works, fine. Don't call that investing or asset building. Like that's just another job. And need to put that in the stay liquid bucket. And then once you have enough assets, then it's kind of the sixth place, and that to me that's the destination for all this, is to stay free. And the reason I believe that's so powerful is if you want to get rich, or you want to just have a modest income, like again, all of our destinations can be unique to us. You can decide to go chill on the beach. You can decide to become volunteer, do philanthropy. You could decide to start a business that's not encumbered by, investors. You can kind of do things on your own terms. Like you can do whatever you want. But if you don't have the right path on those previous steps, you will find yourself moving through different seasons of life where you felt free and then you felt trapped. You felt free and you felt trapped. And I believe just finding a more predictable roadmap to staying free is the best advice, because then regardless of how you define success or your destination, we can all use a similar framework to get to where we want to go.
Yeah. A lot of great nuggets here. A lot of great nuggets. Thank you for sharing that, of course. I'm curious about something you talked about: staying free, not trying to go back between, not oscillating between being trapped and then freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Would you describe your current state as being free? And if so, what does that feel like and what does that look like?
Yeah. So now that I'm out of big tech, I've tried to let go of the bad habits, over process, unnecessary meetings, all those types of things. But I've tried to keep the good things, right? The operational rigor at some of the places I've worked have been quite high. And so I try to hold myself to the same bar. So I don't get to cheat and not write down what I'm thinking for clarity of thought. So I do all those types of things. And those are all kind of tactical things through my day. But I think what makes me the most free is I have permission to call an audible at any time, and I do. And to me, that's the magic. And I felt like when I felt the most constrained is not when I was busy. So actually, again, I'm not trying to say there is one way to work. For me, I enjoy working. What I don't like is someone telling me how to work, when to work. And so right now I have 5 buckets. I spend my first bucket is consume. That's where I'm kind of like reading things, learning things. I have time dedicated to connecting with others, kind of figuring that out. I have time focused on creating, and this is largely publishing, organic marketing, things I might do on LinkedIn or Twitter or what have you. Then I actually have to make something, right? And so on the kind of the deliver part of the fourth pillar is mostly doing the diligence on companies to see, like, is this company worth it? And that's the part where it's still, not as free as I would like. One of the things I find when I'm talking to potential companies for sale, it's easy to assess the founders. Like, and usually in 30 minutes, I can go figure out if, these are folks that I would give money to, or if they built a company that's resilient enough that I would acquire. But the next level is I have to go talk to, they call it a key man clause in investing. And I don't know why it still says man in there, but the point is there are certain employees that if they don't stick around, the whole company could fall apart. And the smaller the company, and I do very small businesses, you could have two or three people that the whole thing could fall apart if, like the director of such and such left or what have you.
Right.
And so through this lens, I have to go talk to these people. And it's surprising how many people are so dissatisfied with work. Like they're so, and when I see a pattern of like these people, they're trying to mask it, right? But they're just like, oh, here, who's this guy on the Zoom who's going to like acquire our company? And like, and so I try to figure out ways to get them to share like, well, how do you, do you really enjoy this? And while that's very, it's kind of draining sometimes, that part of the job is just a reminder to me that, unless you're a caregiver, you have like some extreme responsibilities. I would even say parents overestimate their commitments. Most people, if you don't have health issues or you're a caregiver, you can quit. Now, you can't quit and keep both cars, stay in the same neighborhood, buy all the organic food, like
Right.
take the crazy vacation. Like, yes, like mathematically speaking, you can't do that. But your kids can be safe and can be protected and loved and all of these things without that job. But we want to have both. And that's where people kind of break into jail. And so I think the last bucket there is like my support stuff, like the stuff I don't want to do, like talking to my CPA or other types of things. Just like I need to do it to keep the business running, but just wanted
Yeah.
to close the loop on the 5 pillars. But the reason I feel free is if I have a booked agenda, as long as I'm not being disrespectful to someone, I don't have a ton of meetings that can't be rescheduled. I just do something different that day, right? I have a rental that I'm remodeling right now, and yesterday I didn't need to go over there, but I wanted to learn how he was doing a couple of these jobs. I was like, hey man, can I just watch you? And so my contractor was like, yeah, just don't get in my way. And so I just cleared half of my day and just went over there and hung out in the unit, right? And to me, that's the freedom. I think sometimes we chase optionality, but if you think of options, like a financial instrument, an option is only worth something if you exercise it.
Right.
So if you create a bunch of optionality in life, but you never actually exercise the option, then then doing all that work to create those options is not super valuable. And so I would say I feel free um, because I'm exercising those options, but I still have plenty to go and do because I still have this chunk of my day where I'm like, even now, there's these parts I don't like, and it's just another game, and I just want to keep optimizing it, so every day is a joy.
Yeah. So it's not just options, it's autonomy, being willing to do what you want when you want.
Yeah, and absence, of any of the status or prestige games, right? You're probably familiar with, Naval's, I'm paraphrasing his quote, but chase freedom, not status. When you get rid of the status game, there's so many decisions that are just easier. Like,
Hmm.
when you don't care about a title or you don't care about, like when I was working in corporate, there would be um, these kind of like secret off the agenda executive meetings where like we would go have like an offsite or we would have something, and then after that there would be like drinks at this bar, but the drinks at when we went to the W, like no one really knew, but then after that we got go do this other thing, or maybe some people, I don't golf, but people like would go do something in the morning and I would just go hang out at the club even though I wasn't a golfer, and so you would do all these things and I was just sitting there observing this. Is like, what is the point being in these special rooms? It's just kind of making our ego feel like it's something, but this has nothing to do with the work. Now,
Right.
granted, it might give you some more social capital if you work at a big company to get deals done and get partnerships, because now this person is like, oh yeah, I hung out with LaSean at the country club and blah blah blah. But dude, none of that stuff matters. And so the more you can, I found the more that I at least have like shed myself of placed any value on that status, everything is just an easier decision. And a lot of things that people are chasing, they're not quite as valuable as they would make them out to be. And it's like, if you're familiar with the concept of experience versus remembered happiness, experienced is like in the moment, the dopamine hit, it hits you and you're like, this feels good. Remembered is like, wow, I lost all this sleep, with my baby, but I would not trade that time because, like, look at all the memories that we got to keep. And both of
Yeah.
them are valuable parts of our human existence. And while I think it's fine to use remembered happiness for your personal life, I do not think it's fine to be using remembered happiness for your professional life. Like, that seems silly to me. Like, you
Yeah.
should just go do work that is enjoyable, even if that means maybe you work less or maybe the perceived stability isn't the same. And so, these are things that I continue to work on myself to kind of like optimize and maximize. But I've just found the more I've moved away from placing value on status, the more free I've become.
You could frame that quote right there. Literally, you could. I may clip that. I may have to clip that and just share it on the socials and tag you. That's a really good one. We have about 5 minutes left, and I'm curious. You mentioned you're an investor.
Mm.
I don't meet many investors, to be honest with you. You're probably one of the few. A lot of the folks in my community, we don't know many investors either. Give us a behind the scenes look as into the day of the life of you, an investor. What does it look like, and what do you enjoy about it?
Yeah, so I'll give you kind of maybe 30, 45 seconds of the landscape because I think that's helpful not to conflate all the investors. Um, I focus on alternative assets. And for most entities that you will hear in that bucket, that's going to be private equity, hedge funds, um, and real estate in some fashion. And within private equity, there are traditional kind of leverage buyouts. These are like somebody comes and raises a bunch of debt, and then they go buy a company with debt. So if you hear LBO, that's what that is. Then VC is technically part of private equity, but they're obviously swinging for the fences, right? So portfolio
Mhm.
strategy, you're trying to make 20, 30 bets. They love to say crazy numbers in the VC world where, we're going to 10x, 100x the money. When you look at the actual cash on cash return, it's usually around 2.5%, or 2.5x, which is interesting, right? And so if you look at the actual cash, the dollar I put in as a limited partner and the dollar I got out, um, it's very cyclical in all of these, right? And so, as a limited partner, I could put money in a hedge fund and let this company go manage this. I could, or these partners, I could put it in a VC, let folks go and manage this. I could go raise money and buy apartment building or a cluster. And so there are all these things. And so I paint that picture to then hone in where I focus, which is micro private equity and permanent capital. And permanent capital does not assume that I need to sell the asset. And so what that means is I'm buying companies based on cash flow.
Mm.
I'm not saying like, that we all have a dream and one day this thing is going to be a unicorn. And so I'm going to give you this $250,000 and then hopefully one day it's worth $25 million, right? Um, I've done plenty of angel investments. I don't get energy from it. We've already talked about like I just don't want to do things that don't give me energy. And
Yeah.
so what I'm doing is buying cash flow. And so I'm looking at the EBITDA and more specifically free cash flow (FCF), and I'm trying to figure out how much free cash comes out of this business every day. And then my whole business model is looking at the smaller businesses and say I have two levers: audience and automation. If I go put an organic marketing machine on top of this company, can they go drive their marketing and sales more efficiently? So like stop paying for trade show booths. Like maybe go to the trade show, but don't pay for that booth. Stop buying all these ads through Alphabet and Meta. Like stop doing all this silly stuff. Like you need a sales team and you need organic marketing, right? And so that's one lever. And then the automation lever is like, how can we look at business process optimization, like the way consultants come in at big companies and say, all right, do we have the right processes? Can you automate some of this? So we're increasingly looking at AI. I have two analysts that do this actual work, and they go like break down a business and say, all right, is there a piece of paper, is there an email, like where are all these touch points of data kind of interaction, and then how can we go and kind of streamline. And so the goal is to reposition these companies, and because I'm focused on cash, my goal is to get my cash returned as quickly as possible and just have an annuity, and then I take that cash and then I go buy another company with it. And so there are many ways to think about as an investor. The I guess the punchline I would share for folks who are interested in the space: if you want to do it my way, you need to go get your own capital so you have the autonomy to invest it as you want. I deal with much smaller deals, but I don't need to ask anybody to do the deal, and I
Mm.
love that way to move. If you do a more traditional fund, you have two things you just want to make sure your personality works for. Number one, you have almost always multiple partners. And so your other general partners, you will have a committee, you will make decisions many times together, and you just have to have people that you can go on a ride for. And many times these funds won't mature for 5-10 years. And if you get funds on funds, this may be a 15-20 year relationship. And so don't get married up to some person that you're not going to go on a ride with. And then finally, um, if you are raising money from other people, those limited partners, like you're going to spend a lot of time eating dinners, having drinks, and doing all these things. And so if you don't like raising money and hanging out with folks that way, you're probably not going to enjoy that part of the business. But again, for folks who do that, you can make a lot more money than I do in my business in the kind of the traditional path. And so anyone who's interested in investing, I think it's one of the best levers for curious minds, because you're forced to research. You have to have a blend of, you have to be very introverted at times and go dig deep through the data. You have to have some good interpersonal skills, good emotional IQ, so you can read the room. So there's all these pieces you get to pull together, but you got to know kind of what you're getting into when you take other people's money.
Yeah. It's a very nice behind the scenes look at what goes on in your world. And I know you had to do that succinctly, so thank you for it. We're at time. I like to conclude my episodes with this one question. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you wished I would have? If so, what is that question?
That's great. I would say, and this gets back a little bit to kind of the niche, right? The writing I do online is largely for me to learn more about what companies I could buy or sell, because I'm learning who my people are and I'm understanding their pain points. But increasingly, you can solve a lot of these pain points with really small businesses. And I use this, I call them VSBs, very small businesses, and that's 0 to 20 employees, right? So that's my definition of a VSB. So I'm talking, these are tiny businesses. These aren't, small business with, 1,200 employees. No, these are tiny, tiny businesses. And so VSB is just what I'm using to make it super constrained. But there are 5 quick things that I'll just hit on, trends. First is AI-enabled software. The second is async communication. Third is fractional talent. Fourth is organic marketing. And fifth is zero negotiation sales. So no call for pricing. Pricing is on your website. This is what the price is. You're not going to have a call to negotiate your rate card. Those 5 things are drivers for allowing VSBs to make real money. And in the past, you just couldn't create enough leverage with a tiny team to go generate reasonable free cash flow. And so anyone who is either frustrated with their job or they're in the solopreneur camp and they're trying to figure out where they might want to go, going the VC-backed startup route for the right business still is a great option. Starting a small business that you're going to bootstrap or maybe get an SBA loan if you're in the US, it's still a great option. But there is this new option that has never been this isn't in the last 10 years, no, never in the history of capitalism have we had a point where tiny companies can generate this much value. And I think we're on the precipice of having companies definitely break $100 million, but I believe we're going to see companies with billion-dollar valuations that have 20 or less people. And so as people think about their organizational design, it depends on what industry they're in, what problem they're solving, all sorts of things. There are many companies that are still going to need to be 10,000 employees. So, those don't go away. But there's this expansion in the market. And I just want folks to realize that's an option. And so as folks are thinking about how they might, take their next steps in their career, think about VSBs that are using all of this technology and organic marketing leverage to create value. And when you pencil the math, you might find that it's something that is more interesting than the alternatives.
Wow. I love it. You mentioned you're an author. You have a wealth of information that you've disseminated here in just this 1-hour episode, maybe a 50-minute episode. As we land the plane, what books do you have out there? Have you gotten any of your other thoughts that you've shared here in our episode out on paper? Because I'd love to dive deeper in those, if you have. So do you have any of this written anywhere is the question.
Yeah, so I have some of this in short form on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter at LaSean, LaSean, just my first name. And if you want to drop me an email at my company, I have a couple spreadsheets that have some kind of some of this stuff in a more consolidated form, and I'm happy to share that out. Again, I'm not doing paid coaching, so as long as it's easy for me to wrangle whatever you're asking for, I will usually just pass it along. My email is grow, GROW, at Kager.com. That's CAGR. And Kager, this is the financial Kager that you probably remember from business school. And the reason I chose the name for the company is I believe it's not just about compounding the finances, but as Einstein said, compounding is one of the great marvels and inventions of humanity. And if we think about the same compounding math that we get out of cash with ourselves, there's just this huge unlock on what our real potential is. And it's not linear. It actually is exponential. And when you start to compound all of these things on yourself, like there's just so much magic. So anyone who wants to continue that conversation, or they want some resources, happy to share what I have.
Thank you for that. This has been an absolute pleasure. I'll be sure to go back and listen to it probably 2 or 3 times. There's tons of gold nuggets here. And so thank you for this, LaSean. I've really enjoyed this. I'll be sure to drop your website, of course, your Twitter handle, everything in the show notes. And I know that everyone that listens to this will enjoy it. It's been a pleasure meeting you, and I look forward to seeing, of course, what you keep doing on Twitter and anywhere else that you'll be. So thank you again for coming out. We'll catch you next time. Have a good one.
Thanks, Jordan.
That's it for today's show. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you listened this far, you're the real MVP. If you like this episode, please drop us a 5-star review. For every 5-star review I receive, I'll give my dogs a treat. I swear. Lastly, be sure to follow me on Twitter at The Good Steward. That's THA Good Steward. And if you'd like to nominate someone to be interviewed on this podcast, please send me an email. My email is jcgarciamoney@gmail.com. Until next time, everyone, see you later.